the 7th of July, and Russia is losing its fleet. A chemical tanker exploded and sank to the bottom near St. Petersburg in the Leningrad region. Hundreds dead, ammonia leak, evacuation.
Shut down! No, it exploded, fell, they missed it.
Wow! Moscow under attack. 7 explosions in the Moscow region. They're bombing St. Petersburg and Moscow.
Holy shit! It's a nightmare here.
A chemical plant supplying weapons to the front is under attack. Novorossiysk is shut down. The city is under a state of emergency, and sea drones are attacking coastal facilities. 15 missiles hit the Crimean bridge. Traffic has been stopped.
Holy shit! That's it. We're done.
All infrastructure is under threat.
This is really fucked.
$60,000 Muscovites are stranded in the airport. No electricity, no communication, no internet. Moscow, St. Petersburg, and 30 other Russian cities. For more than a day now, without pause, we have been attacking Moscow and the regions. Lightning, friends, the 7th of July, and the second ship went to the bottom. In the port of Ust-Luga near St. Petersburg, the tanker Eco Wizard exploded and sank. Badu! And an encore. There was an ammonia leak. Part of the crew was evacuated. There is a major emergency on site. A yellow danger level has been declared. The GUR has reached even the Russian Far East, setting off explosions.
It is flying. It's flying. It's flying. I expletive your mouth.
A simultaneous series of attacks across all of Russia. Moscow and the Moscow region are under attack. Up to 7 explosions hit a chemical plant in the Sergeyev Posad district. Novorossiysk is blocked off. The embankments are closed. There are powerful strikes on the Black Sea Fleet circulating online. The Kerch bridge has been attacked. 15 missiles. Traffic has come to a halt. And then there's the aviation collapse at Russian airports. 485 cancelled flights, almost 2,000 delays, and losses of 20 billion rubles, which is nearly $240 million. Russia is losing its fleet, its chemical industry, and its skies. A second ship has sunk near St. Petersburg. Chemical plants and airfields are under attack. Meanwhile, Novorossiysk is on fire. The Kerch bridge is being stormed with missiles.
Holy shit! That's it! We're done!
What is this? A new phase of the war? Let's discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan.
Greetings, wishing everyone good health.
Roman Grigorievich, let's start with the attack near St. Petersburg at the Ust-Luga port. What happened? Please give us your professional assessment.
This is what we once talked about people who care. And now these concerned individuals have taken up the destruction of the Russian oil industry. Since our office is being protected from strikes by our army, these concerned individuals are trying to address these issues with their own methods. How do you destroy the Russian oil industry? In principle, any oil and gas complex is practically asking to burn down, starting from extraction and ending with transshipment. And the same situation applies, for example, to maritime transport. Naturally, all products of the oil and gas sector, for instance, also provide the Russian economy with additional financial inflows. What is ammonia? Ammonia is a derivative of gas. Mainly natural gas is processed. This is mostly how ammonia is produced. Natural gas is processed into ammonia as well. And then it goes on to ammonium nitrate and so on and so forth. That's why for us, for example, destroying an ammonia tanker means destroying the Russian oil industry, the Russian oil and gas sector. In other words, there are currently plenty of people who care about this. As we discussed, this oil crash, I'd even call it an oil and gas crash, has now started all across Russia, beginning with the Far East. The Far Eastern Ukrainian People's Republic, Zeleny Klin. We talk about this recent how a gas pipeline was blown up in Vladivostok at the 155th Brigade, and in Komsomolsk-on-Amur, an oil refinery was set on fire, forests were burned, and they started setting fire to forests and so-called dry brush, including in areas where Russian pipelines and gas pipelines are located. Our guys are trying to set fire to the power of Siberia pipeline, specifically in the far east, and naturally all the way to the northwest, to St. Petersburg, to Ust-Luga. And there was already a direct attempt to destroy an ammonia tanker. By the way, ammonia is a very dangerous thing. So besides the fact that it is poisonous, extremely poisonous, it is also under a certain pressure, meaning that if you, let's say, send regards to the Russian oil and gas industry in the right way, this ammonia tanker could be completely flooded, and naturally the people standing nearby who are not our comrades at all could be hit directly by the ammonia itself. That's why it was the right decision to remove the crew from there.
Roman Grigorievich, the fact that we are, let's say, concerned individuals blew up the gas pipeline, essentially in the Far East, does that mean we attacked the Pacific Fleet, in effect, de facto?
Well, as for the 155th Marine Brigade, it's no longer, well, the main Brian could say that this brigade basically doesn't exist anymore. At one time, they even brought this Vladivostok Brigade to Ugledar. Our guys crushed them there 3 times. And then just recently, within the past week, the command post, the headquarters of the 155th Brigade was destroyed, where it's in the Kerch region. They buried their brigade commander, his deputy, and pretty much the entire headquarters was wiped out. At this point, all that's left is to turn off the gas for the 155th. And that's it. You can basically say it no longer exists. So the gas was shut off too. Most likely that 155th really stepped on someone's toes in our special services, the ones who handle these kinds of tasks. Although I won't rule out, and let me take this opportunity to say that the work on the gas pipeline in the Far East, which also supplied the 155th, was done by our concerned citizens. Ideally, this kind of work should be done by our concerned citizens. And believe me, there are several million of them in Russia. And if we really get serious about Russia, shake it up, especially by destroying oil and gas pipelines, which is exactly what's happening now. It's not for nothing that we've been drawing your attention to this for several weeks, because it's the concerned citizens who are taking action. There is definitely an effect from this.
Dear audience, please like this video. In the comments, let us know what you think about the special operations carried out by our Ukrainian intelligence services and the armed forces of Ukraine on Russian territory, occupied territories, and in occupied Crimea. Every like, every comment, and every subscription helps ensure that as many people as possible around the world see this video. We work for a global audience, so people everywhere know the truth about Russia's war against Ukraine. Roman Grigorievich, a very important topic is Novorossiysk. Attack on Russia's Black Sea Fleet. We've repeatedly said attack Novorossiysk is necessary. Give us a professional summary. What happened there? What was attacked? And who carried out the attack?
Well, we were right to say so because Novorossiysk was like a sacred cow at one time, just like Moscow, Novorossiysk, the Kerch bridge, and even Crimea. Rarely did anyone go there. It's only recently that operations have started there. And by the way, they did a good job in Crimea as well. We mentioned that the air defense was taken out over a dozen enemy surface-to-air missile systems and radar units from the radio technical troops. The main ones were 2 Kasta, 2 and 2 others. By the way, one of those systems was taken out northwest of Kerch in Crimea, and the movement further towards Novorossiysk is part of the same chain of operations. It's a well-planned, systematically executed chain aimed at the methodical destruction of at least the southeastern corridor from Ukraine to Novorossiysk. Why Novorossiysk specifically? Right now, Novorossiysk is the main harbor of the Russian Federation's Black Sea Fleet. Plus, in the Novorossiysk area, there's an oil terminal that supplies Russian oil with petrodollars. In other words, there's pumping and transfer of fuel, oil, and oil products happening there. So it's an entire process. And I think this is just the beginning. What we've seen now was a trial attempt to reach Novorossiysk using new methods. They were tested in Crimea. That is, when a USV, an unmanned surface vessel, approaches Crimea, it's not used as a strike drone or a kamikaze USV, but rather as a so-called aircraft carrier. In other words, it brings FPV drones which are controlled by relaying the signal from the pilot. Our drones have performed very well specifically in this role. These include the Sea Baby, the Magura, And there are a few other drones that are provided to us as mini aircraft carriers. At that time, the radars and launchers of the S-300 and S-400 air defense systems engaged these FPV drones in the West as well. Similar mechanisms were used to take out Russian helicopters and airplanes near Novorossiysk as well. Two Su-30s were taken out by an air defense missile system, which had been almost completely modified, the same system. So these systems, these mini aircraft carriers approached Novorossiysk and used FPV drones to strike the radars of the Novorossiysk port. In other words, the radio technical troops, they were neutralized. They mainly targeted the radio technical troops, and then the unmanned boat would go in and carry out its mission. So the main task of the unmanned boat is to transport drones, FPV drones, and to relay signals for their control. After that, basically, it was supposed to be blown up. The Russians managed to blow it up before it could self-destruct, so the combat mission was accomplished. This is most likely just the beginning. In other words, they tried it out, it works. And since it works, it just needs to be scaled up. So after a certain amount of time, a sufficient number of these types of our watercraft will already be carrying out the task of delivering and relaying control for FPV drones, and they will be targeting the Russian seaport, and I hope the Novorossiysk oil terminal for its destruction.
Roman Grigorievich, lately we've been seeing a lot of information that Russia is deploying missile carriers in the Black Sea, and they are being used during air attacks on our country, during aerial terror. Are we correct in understanding that these missile carriers are currently located specifically in Novorossiysk and that they need to be destroyed?
Well, that's the main thing that needs to be taken up. But first, you need to neutralize the air defense systems that protect Novorossiysk, because you simply won't be able to approach Novorossiysk if there's serious air defense there. And, well, both anti-aircraft and anti-drone defenses as well, including the aviation component. That is the same helicopters and airplanes that are used against drones. That's why the main task at first is to gain air superiority, to neutralize and blind the Russian radio technical troops, the Russian radar forces, and after that to carry out the combat mission depending on the available capabilities. In addition to aerial and maritime drones, missiles also reach Novorossiysk. Right now, some of our missiles are actually capable of reaching Novorossiysk. I think at the moment preparations are underway specifically for this kind of strike. The main objective is to destroy the missile carriers themselves. They have only 3 submarines left, each of which can launch 4-caliber missiles from their torpedo tubes. And several ships of the Russian fleet, which are missile carriers of various classes and tonnages, but still. So they will also need to be targeted. I think this process has already begun. Now we just have to keep an eye on how things develop. We'll be discussing this every other day as soon as there is any positive news.
Roman Grigorievich, regarding the destruction of submarines, this is a very serious and highly complex task. As I understand it, a special operation similar to Pautina needs to be carried out, but it should have a different name. Are we understanding this correctly?
Well, the submarines the Russians have, the ones carrying the Varshavianka diesel submarines, they do surface from time to time. But at sea, for example, it's difficult to detect where exactly they've surfaced or if they're running on electric power. They operate on batteries as well, but nevertheless, they do surface occasionally. But we can only target the submarine precisely when it surfaces and is in a surface position only. Then can we get to it only when it's on the surface? This happens when it comes to recharge with those same caliber missiles, or when it comes in for maintenance at the piers, that is at the docks. And in these situations, that's when we need the work of our special services directly, who can gather intelligence, conduct additional reconnaissance, adjust the strike, and confirm the hit. So it's an entire process. But our special services work in very close contact with our missile forces and our air forces who carry out these kinds of attacks. That's exactly how, by the way, one of their submarines was destroyed. There were 4 submarines. One was destroyed in exactly this way, in a surface dry dock. That submarine was destroyed in Sevastopol. That's when it was hit by a missile, and it can't be restored. It's beyond repair. So in this mode, that's the only way to reach submarines in this particular case. Well, for now, we don't have the means to sink a submarine or track it down at sea.
Roman Grigorievich, at the same time, there is a series of powerful attacks happening all across Russia and the occupied territories. As for the Crimean bridge, there is some very interesting information here. This weekend, information emerged that 13 to 15 missiles attacked the Kerch bridge. Please give your assessment, this is very important, because we are also methodically and systematically destroying missile defense and air defense systems on the occupied peninsula.
The launches, by the way, were reported by Russian social media channels. In other words, this is Russian information. They confirmed that there was the takeoff of several of our Su aircraft, Su-24S, with launches of missiles like Storm Shadow and Scalp. But this was exactly the time when there were attacks on the Rostov region. We discussed this with you. So most likely the missiles were simply heading toward the Kerch bridge. Then they continued over the Sea of Azov, completed their combat mission already in the Rostov region and in Kuban. In terms of range, it was about 250 to 270 kilometers. But nevertheless, the Russians were really scared back then. There were strikes, including in front of Kerch, is again on airfields and Russian air defense systems. The Russians were really terrified, but nevertheless, they were deceived in this regard. The missiles passed along the Azov coast, or rather over the Sea of Azov, and then the strike hit targets in the Rostov region.
Regarding the systematic destruction of missile and air defense systems in Crimea and the actions of our special services, the GUR, SBU, and armed forces of Ukraine on the occupied peninsula over the past weeks, how would you assess their work?
Well, as always, the beginning is good. So where's the problem? We've been at this for how long now? The fourth year of a large-scale operation. And several times already there have been the right beginnings to carrying out a combat mission. We set out to destroy the Russian air defense in Crimea. We're starting to work through the systems. As we discussed before, you can see a systematic approach. And that's exactly how it is. But now, at this moment, we're starting to stall again, just like in previous time. So either preparations are underway for a serious strike. Why is that? Because there is a certain window of opportunity. So if you start targeting the air defense, you have, let's say, about a week and a half to 2 weeks after you've taken out part of the air defense, you have a week and a half to 2 weeks before the Russians replace it and restore everything. And then you have to start everything from scratch again. So the question arises, why did you even start this if you didn't accomplish the main combat objective? The main combat objective in Crimea is the destruction of military stockpile facilities, so-called non-mobile, not just mobile, but stationary military targets, including, by the way, the Kerch bridge itself. And to do that, you first need to destroy the mobile units, mainly the anti-aircraft missile systems, Russian air defense, that is the Russian radar stations. This is an entire process that sometimes takes up to 2, 3, even 3 or 4 weeks or a month of continuous work. You can't allow them the opportunity to recover. If you give them a week to recover, then you can consider that you have to start all over again. So now, again, if there isn't a strike on Crimea this week, you could say the operation has failed again. Well, let's see once more. It will become clear in the near future, within this week. Is there any momentum in this process? Or have we stalled again, like we did several times before, like last time?
Dear audience, please like this video. We have 697,950 subscribers. Let's reach 700,000. I would be very grateful if we could do this within this week. Every like, comment, and subscription from you helps this video reach as many people as possible around the world. And in the comments, please share your reflections on the analysis. Roman Grigorievich, what do you think? Your opinion is truly valuable to us. Roman Grigorievich, at the same time, a series of attacks is happening all across Russia. It's very interesting and important to discuss Moscow and the Moscow region because they are under attack. Last night, a chemical plant in the Sergiev Posad district was hit. Please give your professional analysis of the actions of the Ukrainian armed forces.
This is exactly what we've talked about so many times. They focused on a single target, broke through the air defense frontally using decoys with a sufficient number of decoys. The strike drones reached the military facility, broke through the facility's direct air defenses and inflicted damage, just like this time. A very competent, well-executed attack. That's exactly how it was done. And after breaking through the frontal air defenses, In some directions, our strike drones even went as far as St. Petersburg. So they even headed towards St. Petersburg, scaring the people there, mostly those who were stuck at the airports. And naturally, they approached to a military facility, an outright military facility near Moscow, this plant that produces gunpowder.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
They manufacture components and assemblies for Russian weapons, mainly for missiles and also for drones, but the main focus is so-called chemical production. In other words, they produce chemical products that are later used in explosions. That's why it was very important for us to disrupt their technological cycle. It's not possible to strike a plant like this with a drone. After all, it's a closed military facility. You need a ballistic missile to reach it. We've been waiting for so many years now. For 7 years, this government has been trying to produce a ballistic missile. So we keep waiting. Maybe a cesarean section would somehow help with this. Just give us a hint. We have plenty of specialists for this kind of operation. So only a ballistic missile can take out a serious military facility. Of course, you can disrupt the technological cycle with drones, but only for a short time. That is, after a certain period, 1 week, 2, 3, a month, Russians restore it, and it keeps running. Nevertheless, for a while, the entire production chain, say for a certain type of weapon, is halted or faces certain difficulties. So even for such tasks, it makes sense to use drones.
Roman Grigorievich, Russia losing fleet, chemical industry and airspace, a second ship sunk near St. Petersburg, chemical plants and airfields under attack, Borisoglepsk, Engels, strategic aviation bases, Novorossiysk burns, the Kerch bridge is being attacked with missiles. At least there have been attempts to do so. Is this a new phase of the war? In other words, our special services and the armed forces of Ukraine have become much more active, especially with strikes on airfields, both strategic and tactical aviation.
Well, you could say since the beginning of Summer Door, you remember Operation Web? It was with Web that the intensification of strikes on the enemy's rear began. The only downside there, it's a significant one, outweighing all the positives is that we are not striking oil refineries, because the main economic foundation of this entire war is Russia's oil and gas sector, and it needs to be destroyed. Stop the production of diesel, gasoline, and aviation kerosene. They won't last long on donkeys, or rather, the donkeys on their little donkeys won't get far. We've talked about this so many times already. And you can't fuel planes with donkey urine, they simply won't fly. The Russians keep trying to do this. Well, that's why their planes crash, they just don't want to fly. In other words, there are areas that need to be pressured, that must definitely be pressured in order to stop Russia's advance. So far, that's not happening. But starting almost from the 1st of June, with Operation Web, the strikes on the rear have increased, and not just on the rear, but deep behind enemy lines. We remember, after all, that our drones even reached Izhevsk. And in Izhevsk, strike was carried out on one of the factories that mainly produces certain circuit boards for, and among other things, the same Geran drones, which are Russian-Chinese, are also made in Izhevsk, including Gerans and Chinese Furias. Furia, in fact, is purely a Chinese UAV. That is, it's over 1,300 kilometers. And so the range of our drones has increased, the power of the drones has increased, because now they can carry not just 20 or 30 kilograms, but already 50, 70, even 100 kilograms. And our Aeroprat drones can already carry a 250 kilogram aerial bomb. And they've already demonstrated how they used it on the same Yelabu. So over the past, well, it's been more than a month now, you could say, since summer, since the beginning of summer, there's been an intensification of strikes on the rear areas, especially if you count the strikes, particularly on Crimea. This is already the beginning of what I would call the 2025 counteroffensive operation with the help of Ukrainian forces and the aerial missile component. This is what we've been saying for years now. Our main objective, our offensive goal, is the aviation component. It doesn't matter in what form, whether it's missiles, drones, aircraft, or those who are passionate and driven by the idea of destroying the Russian Empire.
Roman Grigorievich, we're approaching a very important topic, even from a military economic perspective. the collapse at Russian airports. So in these 2.5 days, there have been 485 canceled flights, almost 2,000 delays. And most importantly, the losses for the Russian economy amount to 20 billion rubles, which is $233 to $234 million. How important is this in the fight, first and foremost, against the Russian military economic machine, the things Ukrainian drones have done to Moscow and St. Petersburg? An aviation collapse in Russia?
Well, I doubt that was the main objective. Why? Because if the goal was to inflict serious economic damage, they would have just burned down the oil refinery. They tend to catch fire on their own anyway. That would mean billions, tens, or even hundreds of billions. What is the Russian oil industry? It's $1/3 trillion a year. The Russian oil and gas sector brings in over $300 billion to the Russian economy. So if that had been the goal, if that was the only goal, they would have targeted the refineries. I think our drones were targeting military facilities, like in Sergeyev Pozad, for example, a plant that produces gunpowder. And at the same time, naturally, all the extremely jumpy idiots started to panic. That's why we talked about what Moscow is, what St. Petersburg is. Extremely jumpy idiots for them. The war is somewhere far away. They think of Ukraine like Syria, somewhere out there, somewhere near Iran or Iraq, something like that. In other words, it's far from them, but actually it's all very close. And if military facilities are targeted, or rather, if drones are heading for a military facility, and all these previously unafraid idiots suddenly become scared. And now there are already thousands of Russian citizens who are also stuck, including under the Kapat regime. And this, of course, is also a blow to the Russian economy. Although, I'll repeat once again, it can't be compared to a blow to the Russian oil industry.
Dear audience, now Roman Grigorievich and I will move on to the situation at the front. There is information that the Russian army is advancing in the Zaporizhia and Donetsk regions, and that Lobkov and Podubne have been occupied. The Russians have also advanced near Stepne and Ravnopol. Roman Grigorievich, the floor is yours.
Well, this is a task we've been discussing for the past 3 or 4 months. What is the objective for the summer military campaign of 2025? Just look at all the things we've heard. The capture of Sumy, the capture of Kharkiv, the capture of Kiev. Some of our more reckless deputies are even saying that after taking Sumy, the Russians will head straight for Kiev. Basically, they're saying we should start selling our apartments and run in all directions. That's about the gist of it. But there is no such objective. They lack the forces or resources. The main objectives are spelled out in the Russian constitution: the capture of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Crimea regions. That's it. Everything else is just a smokescreen meant to distract attention. The Kharkiv direction, meaning Lipsy, Volchansk, Sumy direction, or even the Kherson direction, are also diversionary maneuvers. The main Russian combat units, the 500,000 strong Russian army, are concentrated along a front line of about 500 kilometers roughly from Vassilivka, from Enerhodar to Vassilivka. So why are they now trying to cease treeing to expand the land corridor? Expanding the land corridor is also one of their main objectives. They need to push our front line northward from the south in the Zaporizhia direction. That means toward the direction of Kamyansky. There, very large and serious battles are taking place. Right now, the Russians have bypassed our units by moving along the dried up bed of the Kakhovka reservoir, and are trying to approach Kamyansky from the northwest. The direction toward Orikhiv is also a very, very serious axis for the Russians, even the direction coming from Tokmak. That's why recently our GUR did a great job, or guys, destroyed several fuel trains and equipment that were heading to Tokmak from the south, from Melitopol. This was done to supply the direction toward Orikhiv. The same situation is unfolding further on toward Polokhy. The same kind of movement is happening through Kamizharia from Mariupol, from the south through Chernihivka, from Berdyansk. All of this was heading to Polochai, and from Polochai to put pressure on Huliaipol. This is the Zaporizhia front. Next is the Donetsk front, the same situation in Novoselka. They are now trying to advance from Novoselka toward Zaryatev, already entered Zarya, or rather they've entered Zvezda through Komar, and are trying to push our troops out from under Bohatir. The Pokrovsk direction, of course, is all about expanding the land corridor, and the Russians will only be advancing here. Well, a bit further northeast, naturally, in the direction of Kostiantynivka, with the objective of reaching Slovyansk, and along the so-called Kupiansk-Lyman axis. The goal is also to reach Slovyansk, but from the north, from the left bank of the Siversky Donets. So this section of the front, roughly from the Dnipro River, meaning the Dnipro itself, and up to the Oskil, only in the area around Kupiansk. This is the main section of the front for the Russians. They have positive momentum. Since all the reserves they had from the first wave, they had already about half them by May 9th. Now, the second wave, which will come in August, September, all of it will be concentrated precisely on this section of the front, from Vasilivka near the Dnipro to Kupiansk near the Oskil. That's why it's very important for us to reinforce this direction right now, so that we don't lose the remaining parts of Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Luhansk regions, as well as the left bank of the Oskil and the left bank of the Siversky Donets near Lyman. There is an opportunity to deploy a group of security forces. We've said this a billion times already. I think the question, just like last year, will be resolved around Pokrovsk, where the National Guard and the National Police supported our armed forces of Ukraine, calmed the Russians down, at least in the north. In the south, the armed forces of Ukraine resolved the issue. It was Naev's team working in the area of the Vulidar direction. They stopped the deployment of Russian troops in the south as well. So we do have the capability to stop the Russians. Offensive operations are being conducted, but with the help of long-range strike assets, specifically the aviation missile component. This is also very important. That is, local assaults are not included in this mode. And in defense, the goal is to destroy the enemy as much as possible. Yes, they do have positive momentum. Of course, significant reserves have been allocated, with a superiority in this direction of about 1 to 3 or even 1 to 7. In some cases, it's even 1 to 5, 1 to 7 at the max. The balance of forces, so it's difficult, but nevertheless, it's possible. I think we will hold the front line this summer.
Roman Grigorievich, to wrap up, let me ask you a question about geopolitics and strategic military stockpiles. Russia produces 3 times more ammunition in 3 months than NATO does in a year, according to an official statement by NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. He stated that Russia poses a huge geopolitical challenge and is restoring its military capabilities at an unprecedented pace. Rutte emphasized that North Korea, China, and Iran are helping Moscow in the production of ammunition. And this is now very important for us because Russia is fighting against us while NATO is helping us. The final word is yours.
Well, war is mathematics. It seems like the numbers shown are normal. Yes, at the moment, Russia is producing 3 times more over a certain period than NATO produces in a year. But NATO is producing and fine-tuning what's called stockpiling, that is accumulating its resources, while Russia is producing and spending them. And if you look at the other side of all this production, NATO actually has more weapons. If you just do the math, simply count who has more weapons. Russia doesn't even come close to the amount of weaponry that NATO already possesses. And that's what has been accumulated over this time. So there's really nothing scary about this. These aren't absolute numbers, they're relative numbers. Well, yes, in terms of relative numbers, that's exactly how it is right now. And what's the point of NATO spending on something it already has enough of? To keep Russia in check, believe me, all those weapons that Russia is producing at that level, there's no need to copy and increase them. For what purpose? Cover Moscow. I'm not even talking about using BBs as a second strike, but with 13-ton aviation bombs, bunker busters. If you simply hit the Kremlin, for example, with conventional weapons, believe me, Moscow won't dare make a move anymore. We can see it ourselves when our drones reach Sergiev Posad. Muscovites start climbing over each other, tearing out their last hairs in those airports, in the airports. Can you imagine what would happen if strikes actually started hitting Moscow directly? Where would that whole anthill run to? Just imagine, where would they even run? They would trample all those Putins, Muchins, and all the rest of the Patrushevs, just trample them without even noticing. That's why, in this sense, NATO doesn't dare. There's no need to copy Russia, its production, and so on and so forth. They just need to take out Moscow's military targets. Moscow is packed with military facilities like sardines in a can. So just imagine if a few thousand tomahawks hit those military targets, what would happen to Moscow? What would happen to Putin then? Where would he run from the Muscovites? Like I said, the people of Moscow would just tear him to pieces, shred him to bits. For him, even Gaddafi's death would seem like paradise in comparison. That's why I don't think it will ever come to that. And there's no point in paying attention to it, especially to these kinds of relative ammunition figures.
Dear audience, please like this video. Roman Grigorievich and I work on my YouTube channel 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. The well-known military analyst Roman Svitan. Roman Grigorievich, thank you and see you this Wednesday.